guys, I'm Becky Daniels here from Capital Heart Connection.
And I'm Gabby Fisher from Capital Heart Connection. And if you don't know us by now, Becky and I are two single women just venturing around the capital region, dating, learning from all of our dating mistakes. And we decided that we wanted to form a community of single people here looking to date something, outside of the dating apps and the regular. So we're going to be having in-person events. You can follow us on social media. We are going to be collaborating with other organizations and businesses across the capital region to bring people together and raise awareness to what it's like living as a single person in the capital region.
And we're so excited tonight. We're partnering with Talia Cass, who's the communications director from Wellspring up in Saratoga, to talk about some dating red flags. Because as we hopefully all embark now that things are opening up on our journeys to finding love in the capital region, safety is hugely important. And sometimes these red flags can be things, especially early in a relationship, that kind of sneak up on us. But before we get into the red flags, I want to give Talia an opportunity to tell us a little bit about herself and a little bit about Wellspring. So Talia, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be able to talk to you both. And I've been admiring all the social media that you've had. And I think it's really great for us to just really talk about early signs of dating red flags and what that really looks like. So I work with Wellspring. We are the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services Agency for Saratoga County. So we provide a lot of services for different people who are affected by relationship and sexual abuse. We have an emergency shelter, we have long-term housing care. We do have a 24-hour hotline that either a survivor or anyone who may be helping a survivor can call and talk to. We have financial empowerment programs. We even have a pet safety program. So say if if you want to go into the shelter, but you have pets that you can't really bring anywhere else, we do have people who volunteer who can take in pets, which is really huge. So we do really have a lot of different programs, advocacy, case management, and it really helps people with all different complex issues be able to get out of a situation. The biggest thing is that we do really help with safety planning. So when somebody's leaving an abusive relationship, they can plan with us, with somebody who's an expert in the situation. And our advocates are really great. They're really experienced, and it's really such an honor to work with them. Part of what I do is community engagement. So part of our mission, of course, is to support survivors, but we also are working to build a community free of sexual and relationship abuse. So what that looks like is really educating the community on the dynamics of relationship and sexual abuse and how to prevent it. And that's a big part of my role, something I'm super passionate about, and I'm really grateful to be here. So yeah.
Oh, it's so exciting. And you've given us 5 dating red flags that we're going to kind of go through tonight and ask you a little bit more about. And I think it's so important because this, obviously we're women having this conversation, but these are things to look out for no matter how you identify.
Right.
And I think that's something really important to point out, is that the face of victims of this type of abuse or survivors of this type of abuse is very diverse.
Exactly. And, one thing that we know is, well, this affects men and women. I think LGBTQ people are definitely at a high risk, as well as people with disabilities, people of color. Really, so there's a diverse amount of people who are really affected. And honestly, I always assume that there are survivors among us. And so for anyone who's watching, I always say, take care of yourself. If something you feel like sparks some intense emotions for you and you need to stop watching, feel free to. And if you need to call our hotline, we will include that information on the website, so you have that. You can call our hotline and talk to someone. So if you are watching this and it's a lot, we totally understand, and we have advocates to help. But yeah, I think it's important to know that it's really so many people are affected, and that honestly, it's I think 1 in 3 women who are affected by sexual assault and 1 in 4 women who are affected by domestic violence.
That's a
Yeah,
staggering and really sad number.
very. So I'm really happy that we are bringing awareness to these these simple 5 red flags, right? That you can just kind of keep in the back of your mind, not only for your own personal relationships, but seeing friends or family encounter these things too. I have seen a lot of emotional and physical abuse throughout my family. like family members that have my cousins and some closer family members. And I myself was part of a very emotionally abusive relationship. And I think that if I was educated, even something as simple as like talking about these 5 red flags as I was going through that, I would have done things a lot differently. So I'm really excited to dive in. And again, like as Talia said, call the hotline, or always feel free to send us a direct message on social media. If you feel comfortable doing that, we can always connect you to the right people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that, Gabby. I think that everyone is affected in some way, whether it's themselves who have been in an emotionally or manipulative abusive relationship, or someone they know. And a lot of times people don't realize that they're in an abusive situation, because I think when you think of like relationship abuse, you think of physical violence, but really it escalates to that point. So it will start out as like an emotionally abusive situation, or you'll be coerced into sexual activity. And, I think you're manipulated and gaslit so much that you don't realize that, that something like that isn't normal. And then it eventually gets into physical violence. So I think a lot of people, when you say, why does someone stay, they really don't know that they're in that situation, or they do know, but they really can't get out safely. It's very dangerous to leave a lot of the time. And that's why it's really important to talk to advocates and safety plan.
Well, and sometimes it starts out as something completely the opposite. And I feel like this is a great place to dive into one of those first red flags.
Yeah.
And this is a concept that I have known about for a little while, but I feel like I wish I had learned about this earlier, and that's love bombing. So can you tell us a little bit, Talia, about what love bombing is and what it might look like?
Yeah, and I think so. When I think of love bombing, I think a lot of like myself as a teenager and thinking that like grand gestures are super romantic. But now looking at it, I cringe, because so love bombing itself is when you may say I love you really soon, or you may give a lot of extravagant gifts, or you're constantly contacting the person and wanting to see them constantly very early on in the relationship. And you may be very flattered, like think, wow, this person really likes me, but really, they can't have that strong of feelings if they don't know you well enough yet. So that's almost a way that they can start to manipulate a person. And while, I'm not saying that all of these red flags necessarily lead to relationship abuse, but they certainly are very big red flags that can lead to relationship abuse. And I think you see in media specifically, this is represented a lot, like even with Disney movies and things that we grew up watching, is that like these grand gestures of like giving away your life to be with your partner at a young age is like the ideal situation. So we're kind of like trained to think that love bombing is okay, when really it's a very big red flag.
I feel like that can be one of the most insidious ones in that way, because it seems like you said, it's so flattering in the beginning.
Right. Absolutely.
I literally just heard the term love bombing for the first time last week in a podcast. And I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
oh, that makes so much sense. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is every person's dream, right? And yeah, I think that's a huge one that hopefully people are not just learning about for the first time, like I did. But
well, and to
Yeah.
that end, that was the first place I heard about it too, and it was a true crime podcast I was listening to, if that gives you any indication of like how that ended up. And
Mhm.
so that's definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, and I think love bombing could be part of like the cycle of relationship abuse. So like you'll maybe your partner will hit you and you'll get in a really extreme fight, and then the next day they're saying I love you, I can't live without you, and then they buy you all these gifts. Like I feel like that's part of the cycle of abuse.
so red flag number 2, not respecting boundaries or pressuring you to do something. Will you talk a little bit more about that, Talia?
Yeah, so this is actually a really big one. And first, I want to talk a little bit about consent and boundaries. So, with consent, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about consent, because people, maybe they might be coerced into being silent, or, a partner will beg until they say yes. And those things aren't really consent, right? So, you want somebody to be very enthusiastic about what you're doing. You don't want to be intimate with someone and they're just like, about it, I guess we might as well. Like, that doesn't make you feel good. So with that, I think about a partner not respecting if you're tired, if you don't want to engage in activity. And, even if you consented one time, it doesn't mean that you're consenting again. It's something that you constantly have to check in with your partner. And we have boundaries outside of like intimate relationships all the time, right? So for a doctor's office, they need your consent to be able to get, you know, paperwork from a previous doctor, or your friend needs consent to hug you, you know, things that, I was teaching actually at a middle school, we were talking about personal space and boundaries. And even with relatives, like you don't have to hug a relative if you don't want to, those types of things. So when I think of not respecting boundaries, I think of a person who makes you feel weird about not wanting to hold hands all the time, or makes you feel weird about, you know, maybe not wanting to be intimate that night because you're tired. And another really relevant experience or example I think about with COVID. So I think everyone had really different precautions that they were taking with COVID. Some people were really comfortable meeting in person with masks, or they were comfortable without masks. And however you felt about it, if your partner or the person you started to date made you feel bad about how careful you were being with COVID, that's actually a really big red flag, and something that, you know, I saw a lot from just myself and other people dating in the world, that, you know, if somebody makes you feel guilty about what you feel comfortable with and what your boundary is, that's a really huge problem, and you should probably not talk to them. So
Boundaries are so interesting. And like what you said about not having to hug people, like I think about how I was parented, and that there was no knowledge of this at the time, but it was like, if
right.
you didn't want to hug your aunt, you know, you'd be called out for like, oh, that's so rude. Like, just give that person a hug. And like, it was just so normalized that
Right.
so many of us, especially in this age group before more knowledge of this came to be, like we were taught from a very young age that physical boundaries aren't necessarily always something we should keep. And I think, yeah, that just like, that's something that's so ingrained in so many of us, especially women from such a young age.
100%. Yeah. And I think that it's really important when you do go into dating, especially in dating apps, knowing what you're comfortable with and communicating that is important. Because the other person might not know, even if they should be asking how you're feeling. It's important to understand yourself, what your boundaries are, and, you know, what you're willing to do and be comfortable with.
So kind of leading in actually to the next red flag, you know, when someone does cross those boundaries and then has an excuse or a reason why they did it, or they didn't know, or you acted a certain way, that idea of deflecting blame is another one of the red flags you shared with us. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, yes. So with deflecting blame, I feel like this is such a big part of gaslighting, that like if you're upset about something and your partner, you know, they betray your boundaries, or they do something that makes you upset, and then they go back and say, oh, like it wasn't really that bad, you're just being silly, or you're just being sensitive or emotional, which I'm sure we have all heard at some point. But those types of things where they're putting back the blame on you, rather than just saying, oh, you're so right, I'm sorry that I made you feel weird, you know, just a simple, I'm really sorry, how can I make it different, or, you know, that itself is a really big red flag. I also think about I think a lot of people hear this a lot and they don't necessarily think of it as a red flag, but when someone talks a lot about how their ex might be crazy, I think of that as a serious red flag, because that means that there's usually always more to the story, right? And somebody is not willing to admit that things went wrong in a relationship. And instead they're saying, well, this other person was crazy and that's why it didn't work out. But, you know, if a healthy person is going to acknowledge that, hey, the relationship wasn't right, we both made mistakes, it didn't work out for whatever reason, or maybe I did something wrong, or even if they cheated on you, like there's still things that went wrong on both ends, and not acknowledging that and admitting that could be a sign that in the future they're going to do that to you. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. And I always think of, also with deflecting blame, is a lot of times when a partner says something really rude or they do something awful, they'll blame it on drugs and alcohol, which is really, that's such a lame excuse in my opinion. And so for like a good example of that, so going back to consent, consent is also an informed decision, right? Or you know, you're completely conscious, you're not drunk, you're not you know, feeling pressured into something. And then when I go back and thinking to deflecting blame and blaming it on drugs and alcohol, if you're both under the influence and something goes terribly wrong, blaming it on the drugs and alcohol is really not an excuse, because that person at the end of the day is responsible for letting it get out of hand. So again, that's something else to keep looking out for, is that a person, if they're really irresponsible, constantly drinking a lot and blaming all their actions on that, like, is that somebody you really want to be with at the end of the day? And what is that going to look like when things get more serious?
Yeah, and I think that idea too, going back to what you said about like labeling your exes as crazy, it's such a blanket term that like maybe they really did have some things that weren't right, that didn't work for you. And I certainly have found myself in those situations, but I never just blanket say that person was crazy. There were
Right.
things that were part of their behaviors that I didn't like and didn't work for my lifestyle. So I'm not disparaging the person completely. I think that's, taking some ownership. But if you just kind of blanket write someone off, I completely agree. Whenever a man tells me that his ex is just really crazy, I feel like there's definitely more to that story.
Yeah, and I think again, all situations are different. Maybe the person did have a really unhealthy abusive relationship in the past, and that could be something. But when somebody's like, "Oh, she's just crazy," or "He's just crazy," or "They're just crazy," then that's like, okay.
Tell me more.
Exactly. Like it's always good when somebody says something like that to be like, "But what do you mean by that?" Question that. I don't trust it.
So, Talia, I want to ask you a question. When you were talking about people blaming behavior on drugs or alcohol, what about people blaming behavior on mental illness? So that was part of like what I dealt with. The person I was with definitely suffered from mental illness, and obviously, like we're getting over the stigma of mental illness, and mental health is so much more important to be aware of today. Well, it always has been, but now it's like really, coming out as, and less stigmatized. But like, how would you manage something like that? Because there are really amazing people who can be in great relationships who have mental health issues. But
Yeah.
where do you draw that line of like blaming it on a mental health issue, or like it just being abusive, or could potentially lead to something more drastic?
Gabby, I'm so glad you asked that. That's a really good question. And we all struggle with our own mental health things. And I think that when somebody acknowledges that, hey, I have a problem that, I realize that, I might have had a manic episode, or I was really depressed and that's why I did something. But if you're willing to acknowledge that it's a problem and you want to change it, that's where it's different, right? So with relationship abuse, it's usually always a pattern of these behaviors. So one-offs, maybe something was really wrong, or they had something happen and it altered their state for a moment, and they're able to realize that this was really wrong and make it change and make a difference. But when somebody continues to do that and then continues to blame it on the mental illness, that's when it's a really big problem. And at the end of the day, as severe as any mental illnesses are, you're in control of taking care of yourself. And you can rely on your support systems and, talk to a counselor, get the right medications. But you have to make that choice for yourself. And you have to realize that at the end of the day, what you're struggling with affects the people around you. And I think that's the big difference.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another red flag. Some people will jokingly insult you, or they're overly critical, and they can do so in sometimes a joking way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So what I think of with that is like a person who will criticize the way you look or dress, or they'll give you like a backhanded comment like you kind of look weird in that. I like when someone else dresses this way, you should dress like them. Or they may like give you an unsolicited opinion and then get upset when you say you didn't want to hear that. So it's like the reaction becomes defensive because they're giving you advice that they think that they should give you, because it's almost like a power complex. Like they're like, I'm the all being power and you should want to hear my opinion, which is clearly not the case. That's a little bit of narcissism in that as well. But that's also a tactic to get the person to feel like they are belittled and they're not enough. So they feel like they need to be with this person to be better. So it's almost like a way to manipulate the person in a sense. And and a lot of times like they'll compare you to someone else or a celebrity, and it's like it's just a way to make the person feel worse and worse about themselves and feel like almost nothing. And that's another reason why people may stay in an abusive situation, because outside of just, there's a lot of barriers for people when they may end up in an abusive relationship, right? So they may not have housing or financial security. They may be isolated from their family and had to, they stopped working because their partner made them. But they also may feel so worthless because of how that person is treating them and how that those mean, insulting jokes that they're saying, oh, they're just jokes, which is also deflecting blame, could in the long term make the person feel less and less worthy.
Yeah, it's sort of like they're basically setting it up so that you feel lucky to be with them, and who else is going to want you, and you're just so lucky that I'm spending time on you. I've definitely found myself in those situations before.
100%.
So a final red flag to discuss is obsessively checking in, which is one of my absolute biggest pet peeves. But I think what you'll share is a little bit more like we're talking about red flags, but when someone really invades your time and your mental space with hundreds of text messages and checking in so compulsively, that can lead to darker things too. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that might be something that escalates even more toward the end of the relationship, or when you're trying to leave, or if they see that you may be talking to someone else, or they can see that you're unhappy, that could be a tool to pull you back in. But if you're seeing early on that this person is showing up unannounced at your job, at school, or at your house, that's a serious red flag. It's honestly stalking. It's a version of stalking. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were stalking you in other ways that you didn't know, right? So another thing is with that's also kind of part of not respecting boundaries, is making you change your plans and making you constantly see them, which is also isolating you from your friends and family, because you're forced to cancel all your plans to be with them. So these things can kind of be subtle early on, and then escalate into like the person like actually physically stalking you. And that can look anything, like, again, showing up unannounced. It could be where you just see them in the background all the time. They know where you are without you telling them. And that it's scary. It's a scary place to be in. And yeah, I mean, nobody wants to get 1,000 texts from a person that they just started dating too. So,
or from anybody for that.
Yeah, for anyone who has time for that. I mean,
well, it sounds it's like similar to love bombing too, and there's probably some crossover there, but just like that early on, getting lots of attention probably could feel great to someone, and then it escalates quickly to a point where it is scary.
Yeah, and it could get to the point where if you don't respond right away, they may get mad at you and yell at you, when really, like, you have things that are going on in your life. Everyone has their own things, and everyone should still be an independent person at the end of the day. No matter who you're with and what you're doing, you shouldn't feel like you have to constantly answer to them, or that your life is their life. Like, you are your own person, and it's healthy to have independence in a relationship. Absolutely. And, if anybody who's listening to this, if you feel like, oh, this is making me think of either something that you experienced in the past, maybe something that, you're currently experiencing, or you've seen from someone else that you're close to, don't hesitate to reach out to Wellspring, because we really are here to just talk. We have a free hotline. We're non-judgmental, confidential. So if you just want to get an opinion of something, if any of this resonates with you, I really, suggest that you call us.
And Talia, you did mention that Wellspring, it's located in Saratoga, and serves Saratoga County. If someone does not live in Saratoga County, can they still make use of your resources?
Yeah, so they can certainly definitely talk to us, and we can figure out together what works. We may provide references to other places depending on where they live. So we are willing to work with people and kind of figure out, based on the situation, what would work best and who we can refer them to.
So no matter where you live, guys, in the capital region, if this is something that's calling to you, you've got a resource in Wellspring, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Talia, I'm really glad that you brought up the point where even if you're experiencing some of these red flags today, that you can call, because I feel like sometimes people wait until something really, really, really escalates. It's still early on in the relationship, you're seeing some of these red flags, but you might not know how to handle it. Take the leap and make the confidential call. Or just, like I said, DM us, and like we'll connect you to the right people, but don't wait until it's too late.
Yeah, you can also DM Wellspring. We're happy to connect you with anyone. And you're right, Gabby. So a lot of people do wait until it's escalated to a really bad place and they feel unsafe and it becomes an emergency. But I really encourage you, if you feel uncomfortable, like something is wrong in your relationship, even if you're not willing to leave, what we do at Wellspring is we really just are here to listen and kind of give you your options. And we really want you to make your own choices, because a lot of times when you're in those situations, it feels like all of your choices are taken away. And we want you to feel enabled to make your own call, so giving you the resources to, figure out what you want to do. We're not here to pressure you and tell you what decisions you should make in your situation.
I think you touched on something too. Both of you said, like, if you're feeling like something is off, and I think just really reiterating that even if it doesn't seem bad to listen to your gut, you're usually right. Like, tune into yourself if that little voice in your head is feeling like something like this resonated with you, or there's just something off about that person or that relationship. I think it's when we don't trust that voice in our own minds that we can let things escalate too.
Yeah, absolutely, Becky. And again, it may not even be where it's necessarily an abusive situation, but if you feel like your relationship is making you exhausted all the time, you're constantly really sad, you feel like you're doing something wrong, um, I feel like that in itself should, you should reach out and talk to someone, because no matter what it really is, it's good to talk about and see, what there is to do to help. Because again, not all relationships are perfect. All relationships have ups and downs, but at the end of the day, you shouldn't feel like you're unsafe and that you are constantly wrong and that the person makes you feel like a terrible person. That you should never feel like that. So.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, Talia, I want to
So,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Becky.
No, I was going to ask a final question, so you go first.
Hey, so what's on the horizon for Wellspring? Because I hear that there's some expansions happening.
Yes, we're so excited. So in October, we announced that we purchased property off of Route 9 in Malta. So currently we are housed in downtown Saratoga Springs, and our facility has been really great for us. We've been existing for, I think, over 40 years now, but we've really outgrown our space. And with COVID, we lost some storage space. We had to really make do to space out our employees, and it hasn't been great for us. And we want to be able to have an inviting space that, clients and even our community can feel great going to. So with that, it's currently in development. We're going to be sharing more and more pictures as it's being built right now. Like the foundation's up, you're seeing the walls being built. It's really exciting. But with that, so in this space, we'll have a lot more client space. We'll have a community room, so we'll be able to do panels, movie discussions, host more programs there, and actually invite our community into our space, which is really exciting for the work that I do. And then we'll also have a separate entrance for clients, so they can go in privately. They can actually park in a private space. There's a children's playroom, so they can bring their kids with them. And then the public can enter in a different area. So it really allows us to do much more. We'll have a bigger food pantry, way more storage. And I just think that it will allow us to do so much more and really expand the services that we already have. And I think the services we have are really crucial. And we're even going to be able to take it to the next level. So I think it's such an important time for us. And I'm really excited to get the word out about it.
Oh, I love, maybe we could do a virtual tour when everything is open and we can show off your new space. That's so exciting.
I would love that.
Well, and as we wrap up too, Talia, where can everyone find you? So we'll make sure links and everything happen in the comments and the captions for this video, but are you on Twitter? Are you on Facebook? How do you get in touch?
Yeah, so our website is wellspringcares.org. You can follow us on Facebook at Wellspring Saratoga and on Instagram at Wellspring Saratoga. And lastly, I do want to say we have got such great community support with this new campaign, and we've always had such great community members, but the funding that we've gotten for this through our community members has been incredible, and I'm so grateful. And I even get a lot of messages from people like, hey, I have these donation items, can I bring them over? And well, that has been something that's so helpful to our clients. I think at this point, we are mainly accepting gift cards and monetary donations for our campaign. So if you go on wellspringcares.org, you can learn more about that as well.
Wonderful. Excellent. And we'll put together a blog post with all of the red flags and all of Wellspring and Talia's contact information and where you can donate as well. So thank you so much, Talia. This is so fun. We should definitely continue doing this.
Yes.
This is an incredible resource and such an inviting way of dispersing this information. And
I agree. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. And it's just so nice to talk to people who are really excited to hear about it, just like I'm excited to talk about it. So I really hope this resonates with people.
We'd love to do this again. We've got
Likewise.
Lots we can dig into.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.